Okay, sorry about that. So that's where we go in the next chapter. We're gonna, in the next few chapters, we're gonna, not next few chapters, next few slides, we're gonna talk about how we can use net present value after we kind of go these values that are not present value yet. All right, so we're gonna start with concepts that don't use these discount methodologies, and then we're gonna go to the more complex concepts. This next one is called accounting rate of return. So this is how we determine our rate of return with that isn't using net present value concepts. So the account, you're gonna have to memorize all these formulas, by the way. Accounting rate of return is your annual after tax net income divided by your annual average investment. This, if you're curious, if you're ever interested in taking your MBA, this is all the same stuff. Like this is the same stuff you would learn on your MBA in an MBA class. So make sure you're just learning it now. It's going to save you a lot of effort down the road. So accounting rate of return is equal to your annual after-tax net income. So how much net income you're making after tax divided by your average investment. And then we can calculate average investment by taking beginning plus ending divided by 2. Or we can calculate average investment by taking average book values divided by number of years. Either or, right? We're just taking an average. I always think that these formulas are a little demeaning, right? We're just taking an average. So you can determine an average by dividing it by 2 or by dividing it by the average years used if we have the total book value. So let's use some example. So if you have a beginning book value of 16,000 bucks for an assets, the ending book value is 0. Our average investment is 2. I mean, our average investment is the beginning plus the ending divided by 2. And then we get the 8,000. Right? Because we started with 16,000, we ended with 0. Our average is in the middle, 8,000. And then what if our after-tax net income is 2,100? That'll be given to you. Then our accounting rate of return is 26.25%. Because we were able, with $8,000 of average investment, we were able to make a $2,100. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So the weakness is it ignores this time value of money that we've talked about, the time value of money, the net present value, the discounting concept. It's focusing on income, not cash flows. So it does not tell me when the cash came in or when it came out. Like, this is all well and nice, right? This difference of, oh, we know we're going to make our money back in 11 years from college. That's great. But it doesn't, what if I have a family to feed? Or what if I have these other responsibilities and I can't wait 11 years? What if I need the money back in 5 years? Or I have some kind of debt coming due? Same with businesses. We don't get to see that with this accounting rate of return. And then if income varies year by year, some years it might be beneficial, some years it might not. Generally in practice, I don't see this used. Just to be blunt, now that calculators are so complex and we all have Google Sheets, you are generally going to use these next concepts, the net present value concepts. Payback period is a good concept too. I don't generally use the accounting rate of return. So let's talk about net present value and describe its use. We've talked about net present value before in this class, and you should have talked about it in financial accounting. Has anyone not heard this term before or is not too familiar with it? We all have a basic understanding of net present value, right? Right, net present value means money's worth more today than it is in 10 years. If I was to tell you, hey, I'll give you $1 million today, or I'll give you $1 million in 10 years, what would you prefer? Today, right? Everyone wants the money today. If not, and the reason being is because you could use that money and to buy stuff today, and stuff today is cheaper, and it's nice to have money today, or you could use it to invest. So we have to discount these cash flows in order to compare them to what it would be like if we were to make a traditional investment. So think about it this way. That we can look it up. What is the average return of the S&P 500? Average return S&P 500. Approximately 10%, it's saying. So in theory, any decision that we make should at least make what the market's making, right? Like this college aspect. If we have $160,000 over the next 4 years, this better give us a 10%. Or this decision to go to college better give us a better than 10% return. Otherwise, we could have invested this in the marketplace, not gone to college, and been better off. Maybe not like intellectually, or maybe not, but theoretically, but from a cash flow perspective, you might have made more money. So let's calculate it out, right? What if I was to make a 10% return in the market? That's what this is calculating. We're determining the present value of these cash flows. So what is the present value? Let's see. Let's do it. Present value of net cash flows. PV. So we can calculate this with the present value calculation concept in Google Sheets. If you ever want to look up what a Google Sheets is, how you calculate the formula in it, present value, Google Sheets. I'll tell you here. There's always something you can Google. You put the percentage. Where is it? You put the percentage. The rate, which is the percentage, the number of periods, and the future value or the payment amount. So we can just say here, what's the percentage? Let's call the rate. Well, we can always hard code these. We'll say the rate is 10%. So present value rate of 10%. The next one was the number of years and the payment amount. Number of years is 1. The payment amount was -40. And I think we should call this 0. Because in theory, that's the start of the year. So it's gonna, this will just be 40,000 present value. 1. Let's see. J1. And I'm putting some dollar signs by these. This gives me an absolute reference. And then, so that gives me calculation. So what am I doing wrong here? I see it's duplicating. Let's see. Present value rate. Oh, that's why. Fix the formula. The formulas up here. And then I'll explain them. A1. So what I'm saying here, this is, you can use this in any formula calculation. We're saying the present value using a rate of 10%. We're taking A4, which is the number of years. So at this point, none, on the first time you pay for college, you haven't, it's the beginning of college. So no years yet. No future payments. And we're saying that B4, this is our future payment we're making to figure out the present value. So the future payment we're making is 40,000, 40,000, 40,000, 40,000. That's all the inputs. What's our future payment we're making? What's the percentage? What's the number of years? How far is it into the future? And so the total cost is $139,000 in present value. And then we're going to figure out our future value cash flows. So let's see here. This is the G. Yep. So now we're discounting. What we're doing here is we're discounting this into present value, present dollars. So what we're saying here is, what is this difference of $24,000 worth in today's dollars? Like, what would I have to invest today to make $24,000 in 4 years? If I invested $17,000 today in the marketplace in the S&P 500, in 4 years, it would be worth $24,000. Does that make sense? So now we can actually see, when do we make our money back? We make it back rather quickly, right? We make it back at the same time as the payback period. So by the 10th year, we make more money by investing in college, our college education, than we would by investing in the marketplace. Does that make sense? So it's still, we make more money in the marketplace. Let's see, is that right? Yep. We're going to make more money by going to college than investing in stocks, which is why people still go to college, right? Like if this was ever to flip on us, then we wouldn't be going to college anymore, right? Like we would make that decision. Everyone would be making the decision to invest in the market. So that's kind of like how people are making their decision. It's still taking about the same amount of time though, about 10 years to get a return. So that's all they're doing here, by the way, is they're taking that accumulation and they're discounting it in order to figure out what the value is. So in here, the net present value, if we were to work for 30 years, is something like $740,000 in today's dollars. So by making the decision to go to college today, you're actually making about $740,000 in today's dollars, which makes sense. Most people say if you go to people who go to college make about $1 million in today's dollars more than people who don't go to college. That's pretty much what this calculation is proving out. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's this concept of net present value. You can do it with this formula too. I don't want to spend more time on it. I think it makes sense. Any questions? So does anyone prefer me to copy paste this one over too? Or does it make sense using my example? Thumbs up, we're all good, move forward. Okay, cool. Hopefully we should all be feeling good about going to college now, right? Hopefully. Okay. So let's compute the net present value and describe it. Oh, we did that, net present value. So really the question here is, if we have a positive net present value, we should make the decision. That's the thought. If we have any unlimited cash available, and if the future cash flow is expected to yield a net present value positive amount, we should always make that decision because the decision is worth more, right? It's worth more than our alternative investment. But if we're comparing several investments, we might want to choose the one with a higher net present value. Does that make sense? So let's play this out further. What if we were to make this investment? This investment of foregoing the $40,000 and at the 10% rate. But what if we were to invest what if we had $160,000 today? What if your parents gave you $160,000 and said, you can use whatever you want for it? So let's use this as the same example, except we have cash today. We can invest in the marketplace, or we could go to college. So $160,000 today. And then we could either use that 160,000 to go to college. We've calculated the present value of going to college here. We can use that $160,000 to invest in the marketplace, or we can use that to buy a home. So if we invest in the marketplace, we know that the future value is going to be 10%. 10%, 10%, 10%. It's always going to be worth this 160,000 if we're discounting at 10%. We invest in a home. So that's the marketplace. This is going to go up by 1.1 every year. Times 1.1. And that'll just keep going up. Every year, theoretically. And then by the end of 30 years, it'll be worth $2,500,000. If you invest in your home, you're theoretically saving rent. Let's say the average home appreciation in Bay Area. So home appreciates at about 6.74%. So if we get a home, you get your 160,000 times 1.067%. So that if you were to buy a $160,000 home, I know that doesn't exist in the Bay Area. We're not going to calculate out debt. It'd be worth $1.1 million in 30 years, theoretically, if we take the average return. Then we could take the net present value, and we know, then we have college, which we have over here. We can take the net present value of all of these. This out here. Net present value. NPV. Figure out that there's an NPV formula. That's what I'm trying to show you here. NPV. Google Sheets. It'll tell you how to calculate out the formula. You choose the rate and then all the cash flows. The rate we're saying was 0.1, right? The cash flows are all here. There's another easy way to calculate NPV. Oh, sorry. Present value formula. Present value, it says we take the rate, the number of periods, and the payment amount. So we're saying here we're investing this stuff for 30 years. So the rate's 0.1. The number of periods was 30. And the future amount is this. 1.1. And that payment, 0. So we can see here, in this case, investing in the marketplace yields us, what should is it? Let's see, it should yield us a, let's see, 29. Right. This equals 160,000 because that's our initial cash flow. So investing in the marketplace gives us 0, right? We had $160,000 to start off with. That's why investing in the marketplace is our future take back plus our original amount, our original investment. Negative 66,000 for the home. Let's see. And then a positive amount for college. So if we're going to make a decision, we'd obviously choose the college, right? When we're comparing, if we were to, let's say if these were to be completely negative, we would never make these decisions and we'd only pay for the college, right? We'd never make a decision that's less than 10%. So in theory, you would never buy a Bay Area home, right? Because you could always invest in the marketplace. Let's say these were actually positive, just for fun. Let's say that the numbers wound up being positive. So let's say the home was 67,000 and the marketplace investment was 160,000 and the college was 740,000. Which ones would you choose? In theory, you'd choose all of them because they're all positive. They all give you a better return than whatever your 10% was. But if you had to choose between one, if you only had $160,000 to invest, you'd obviously choose the college, right? So that's the kind of questions I'll ask you when we're doing the net present value. I'm going to ask you to make comparisons and then ultimately decide if that investment is worth, what investment you would choose. And so if we're asking from a net present value concept, you're always going to choose it if it's above zero. But then if you can compare between multiple investments, if you only have like a limited amount of cash to invest, then you're going to choose the best one. That's how you can get it on a multiple choice. So this other concept's simplifying computations for annuities for present value of 1 to be received. So there's other calculations you can use to simplify it. Like you can look at present value from an annuity viewpoint. You can look at it from a cash flow viewpoint. There's all these different formulas for it. Just feel free to use a calculator on it. And I showed you how to look up those different calculations via Google Sheets. So this is a saying here, like if we have an annuity, there's this worksheet you can use in order to calculate this 6.11144, or you could just use the calculation I just showed you, right? You could just use a calculator. You can use your calculators on the exam. There's also online financial calculators as well you can use. And so if there's uneven cash flows, this is the example. I'll put this example into our workbook. Uneven cash flows. Uneven. That's what I was trying to show you with the college versus buying a home versus investing. Let's see, year 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. Let's enter this in so you have the example. 8,000, 1,000, 5,000, 5,000, 2,000, 9,000. These are the cash flows each of these individual projects will create. They'll all create $15,000 in cash flows, but at different times. This is a present value indicator. So 0.9091, 0.8264, 0.7513. You can just use the calculator to find these amounts. And then present value cash flows. This times this. A, B, C. So we're just multiplying these out. By the rates that we talked about using present value, and we get the present value by project. What am I doing wrong here? Let's see. 73,909. 4132. Yep, that's right. And then we have an initial investment, 12,000. That's where we get net present values. And so even though all of these projects give us the same cash flow, because they give it at different times, they have different net present values. So if we can only choose between one project, we'd choose project B. If we can choose anything above net present value, we could choose A and B. We would never choose C. It's because C, even though it gives us 15,000 bucks, it's much later in the term. These amounts, you can get them either through what we've talked about in financial accounting before, your present value workbooks, or you could just use a calculator. And so that's like this concept of rationing. There's hard rationing and soft rationing. Sometimes we internally ration projects because we want to make sure we're choosing the most successful projects. Sometimes we have hard rationing, like we don't have enough money to invest in multiple projects. That's all the different concept between hard and soft rationing. I might have the money, but not want to invest because I want everyone to make wise decisions and choose the best projects, or I might just not have the money, period. Is this making sense? I want to be clear. Obviously, the idea between, I went through this pretty quick, but the idea between going to college, buying a house, and investment has other considerations. Like we didn't take into consideration the fact that you take a loan to buy a house. So there's interest costs that if we were to really build out this, there's interest costs that we'd have to build into it. Also, we're saving on rent, theoretically. Like instead of paying for rent, we'd be paying towards principal. So like there's other calculations that would go into calculating the net present value of a home. Same thing with the investments. There's like fiduciary costs and there's dividend payouts. But I think you get the gist, right? There's a reason why people still go to college. It's because it has higher earning power than, at least that one action gives you higher earning power than just investing in a home or investing in a marketplace. And a lot of times investing in the marketplace is kind of one of the best standard investments you can do unless you have a business that can have a higher return. So there's this concept of internal rate of return that helps us. The whole concept of internal rate of return is it's a net present value indicator that helps us make decisions regarding projects that have different net present value amounts. So what if I have a project that gives me a $100,000 net present value, and another one that's much larger requires a much bigger investment and much different cash flows that gives me something similar or varying? I might want to use IRR as a comparison instead of just looking at numbers, right? Because the size of a project will change the numbers. We might use an IRR to do a more fair comparison. Sometimes it's better to look at a percentage. And so that's what we use here is the interest rate. What the IRR is, the interest rate that gets us to discount the net present value to zero. So we can use that for college. Like what is the internal rate of return for going to college? IRR is 25%. That's just the calculation here. It's as simple as saying IRR and then putting all the cash flows. So if I was to invest this kind of cash at the beginning and then get this return by going to college, I'm getting an average of a 25% return for my college. So what does that mean? That means that in order to choose an investment better than college, I would have to have something that gives me a better than 25% return. So if you knew you can make a better than 25% return on $160,000 with an alternative investment, then you should do that instead of go to college. That's the concept. Does that make sense? In other words, this value that we got, where is that? That 700,000 value here, 740,000. If I was to change the rate to 25% here, it's going to go to zero. Or close to zero. That's what that's what the internal rate of return is. So let's use this example from the book. Project life is 3 years. Initial cost, 12,000. Cash inflows of 5,000. What's the IRR for the project? First, we have to compute the present value of the project. Let's see what they're saying here. So first we have to figure out the present value of the project. It's 12% times a 2.4 discount rate. This is the workbook that you could use if you weren't using a calculator. So internal rate of return, they're saying here is 12,000. Compute the present value factor for the investment period of 2.4. And then we know it's 2.4 IRR. So the IRR is about 12%. The idea here is we're like backing into the percentage. So if you were to look on a workbook, you would go to your present value factors of an annuity. You would go to period 3. You'd look for the closest thing to the 2.4, the annual net cash flows divided by your initial cost. The other way to do it is just what I showed you here, initial cost, 1,000. So you can do year 0. It's easier. 3,000 or 5,000. For this, 12%. Same thing. 2 ways to calculate it. This is if you have the worksheet that you learned in financial accounting. I'm teaching you, you could use this IRR function. If you do equals IRR, you could figure out, in Google Sheets, you can figure out what your internal rate of return, which means that you're getting a 12% rate of return on this investment. So this is exactly what saying, hey, use spreadsheet software to compute IRR. That's definitely the best way to do it. In practice, I would never use like a workbook. So I'm trying to teach you what I'd use in practice. We use IRR to evaluate a project and compare projects against predetermined rates. So here's everything we learned today is payback period, accounting rate of return, net present value, and internal rate of return. Payback period's useful. I think it's still a useful metric because it tells us how quickly we'll make our money back, which is helpful. Sometimes we don't have a lot of time to make our money back if there's other pressing factors, or if we're taking a loan and it comes due at a certain time. Accounting rate of return, the nice thing about it is that it can measure based on accrual-based income. So like on the income statement. And it's easy to calculate and understand. Problem is it's not net present value and it doesn't tell you anything about the terms. So not my favorite. It's probably my least favorite out of all the metrics. My favorite ones are net present value and internal rate of return, and that's because they reflect the time value of money. But the best is probably net present value because it's useful to understand the dollars and cents return. The problem with net present value is it's difficult to assess dissimilar projects. Like going to college versus buying a home versus investing in the market requires a lot of different efforts. So even though you know you can make more by going to college, it's a lot harder to go to college than just to dump money in the marketplace. And so it's really tough to make those decisions. Internal rate of return is more useful, like investing and checking out these different projects because it's see by incremental how much the percentage is better, but it ignores the risks over a project life. You don't see, there's other risks with the internal rate of return too. It assumes you're always making that same return over the project's life. We used NPV and IRR here. So I already taught you how to do this appendix. So this last piece is how do we analyze the capital investment using break-even time? This is the same concept as the payback period, but we use the net present value concept. So if you hear break-even time, it's also called discounted payback period. We just use this present value of cash flows instead of the non-discounted cash flows. So let's see payback period. So this is non-discounted over here. This is discounted. It's our discounted breakback our discounted payback period. Comes to about the same. Because we discount our initial cash flows too. This is a way to make it a little better, like make the payback period a little better. Instead of just doing cash flows and figuring out the payback period, we actually did the cumulative value of net present cash flows. I'm not going to test you on this for your final. The things I'm going to test you on your final, I want you to know all the formulas. I want you to know your formula, the difference between capital budgeting, the different ways to capital budget. I want you to know payback period. I want you to know accounting rate of return. And I want you to understand net present value and IRR. The real takeaway is this slide, this last slide. Here. I want you to understand all of these pieces and then how to calculate each one of these. You can use Google Sheets. You can use an online calculator to make these calculations, because that's what you would be able to do in the workplace. Any questions? I can go into more examples if it's, I know it's a lot. I can go into more examples if you have questions on this, or if not, I'll stop the recording. And any questions we want recorded? Okay. Sure.
I have one just out of curiosity. So this slide is talking about like these steps that you would have to deal with post audit. So is this the kind of thing you would have to handle as like a company's internal auditor?
No, not really. That's a good question. It would more be post audit for managers. So like, let's say we make, there's a lot of estimates that we used in all of this. I went relatively quickly to make these out. Like we took an estimate that going to college will get you a 10% raise every year. That might not be a true estimate. We also made the estimate that the stock market is giving you a 10% return, or that housing will be worth 6% in annual returns. Those might not be true. So a post audit's to just check, like after a year, we'd want to check and see if our estimates were actually accurate. Are the projects giving us the cash flows that we expected? Maybe we're getting a much higher return on the college investment, or maybe it's turning out we've decided to take a government job and get much smaller raises. Then maybe we should not get a further degree. Maybe we should be investing in a 401k or something like that. Or if we're a business, we're making an estimate that buying a machine will make us a certain amount of money, but what if the machine isn't used? That's what this post audit is. Like we always take our decisions and then assess do what's called a post-mortem, like making sure the decision was actually viable.
Okay, I see. So like after the auditor's torn through your entire life, then you deal with this?
Well, not even if the auditors, forget the auditors. It's just as a manager, you want to make sure the decisions you're making, like the estimates you used for your decisions are actually viable, that they're actually correct, or you were close to correct on them.
Okay, got it. Thank you,
sense?
Professor.
No problem. Any other questions?